Hi, everybody. It's Pete Oliver. Welcome to the Emerge on Purpose podcast. This podcast is for sales reps and managers who want to become better leaders. Each show, we'll talk about a different leadership principle that will help sales reps and managers emerge on purpose.
Alrighty, here we are for another episode of Emerge on Purpose. We have a guest today, Rich Austin. Rich, I will go to you in a second for a quick introduction. We have a topic today on negotiation. This is a topic by request. It's one that, as much as we try to prevent it or want to not get in that situation, it's certainly one that at times, especially with larger deals, it's just a way of the world. It's a way of getting the sale done. So we're gonna go into lots of different areas of mindsets around negotiation, how to go for a win-win, certain beliefs and needs, and also different types of buyers and how good or bad they can be at negotiation. So I'm excited for this conversation. Rich, before we jump in, would you give a quick under 1 minute commercial of who you are and why you feel fit to chat about negotiation?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Honored to be here. So thanks for having me. Appreciate it. For those of you that don't know me, which is probably the majority of our audience, I've been a Sandler trainer since 2010 with a little 1-year break there where I went to work for an executive coaching firm called Novus Global. And so why am I fit to talk about negotiating? Because I got my lunch eaten multiple times by prospects in companies and organizations in negotiation. I've learned a lot of lessons combining that with the Sandler methodology and approach for negotiating and combined with our methodology for qualifying. Have now gotten to a point where I think I could say I've had a fair amount of success in this arena, and a lot of do's and a lot of don'ts, and most of them come through the school of hard knocks. So yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. I'll admit I probably don't have all the answers, but I've got a few pieces of wisdom. So yeah, I look forward to the conversation. Thanks again, Lindsay.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to really just talk about, I mean, I hear all the time the concept of like a win-win when it comes to negotiation, but really breaking that down a little bit, and why it's so important to have both parties satisfied and what that does for the longer term relationship. So it's just knowing that negotiation is a critical moment within that sales cycle. And so how do we handle it with grace and finesse and equal business stature?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's something that you're really passionate about. Let's do this. I've heard you talk about selling versus negotiation. Do you sell or do you negotiate? Maybe we could just start by giving a little definition of the two, or what the difference is there.
Yeah. So again, coming from Sandler and my own experience, first of all, negotiation is one of those, it's a term that's thrown around quite a bit. We see it glorified, TV, movies, in the media. You want to be a savvy negotiator, and we praise negotiators, but selling sort of gets the short end of the stick. So the way that we define it, selling is getting your price according to your terms. That's what selling is. And negotiation is modifying your price or your terms in some capacity. So the very definition would lead us to believe that if we're negotiating, that we're probably conceding something, as opposed to getting what we're asking for in the first place. So that's a good place for us to start.
Yeah, it is. And I think that brings us to that win-win or win-lose that I was talking about. And it seems kind of obvious, okay, win-win, both parties are satisfied. Do you have thoughts on the difference there? Like breaking that down a little bit, like what is that real win-win, win-lose, and how does that affect like the psyche, right? If we know that people buy from people, we're trying to be more human and transparent in all of our interactions. Negotiation obviously is a point where there's some friction. So let's break down each one of those and talk about how we might be able to diffuse that friction a little bit.
Yeah, well, so where we're starting then is, let's talk about what it looks like to win a negotiation when you're, let's say, dominating the other party for one reason or another. What does that do long-term to the relationship? Well, if you've ever been a part of a negotiation or any type of a buying process where you've been on the short end of the stick, there's typically a little bit of resentment there. You didn't get what you want. You modified your terms in some capacity or another. And 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months down the road, that resentment is probably going to show up in the form of frustration, or the other party is not meeting my expectations, and vice versa. If they feel the same way, if they feel like they were on the short end of the stick, then that probably is not going to lead us to a healthy relationship that's collaborative and open and vulnerable. So the idea here is, how do we figure out a way to both get what we want so that it'll sustain a healthy relationship long term? And essentially, if there's one piece of wisdom there, it's let's get our expectations out on the table from both parties as early as possible. And let's figure out if and where there's going to be a showstopper within those expectations. Because if there is, I'd rather have that conversation up front than getting all the way through the sales process or the buying process and have it crop up at the end, where it's much more likely to be a point of contention. I'd rather lose early or have a conversation like that early and get through it together and find a meaningful solution than have it crop up at the end of the conversation.
Sure. Yeah. And that kind of, you said upfront, and those who know Sandler, we have a concept called upfront contract, which is really just getting on the same side of the table. And that's why we're here today, is to talk about negotiation and getting on the same side of the table. So it's not adversarial, and it's not like you're feeling that triumph over your counterpart and starting the relationship in that way. I don't suppose you could share how that, what that might sound like, putting something to the table early on with the prospect, where it's just, you're almost qualified, you're trying to qualify early. How would you get that on the table? What does that sound like, in doing it up front in a way, so you're not figuring that out way too long down the road?
Yeah, so I won't, most of the people tuning in, I would imagine, know what an upfront contract is, and they know the elements of it. So I won't lay that part out, but what I might share is a tactic, which is called diffusing the bomb before it blows up. So there's a Sandler rule: the best time to diffuse a bomb is before it blows up. So as part of my upfront contracts, when we're establishing expectations at the front end of an opportunity in terms of what's important to each of us and how are we going to go about having this conversation, how are we going to make decisions together, Sandler happens to be a premium option. And basically every one of the clients that we work with are selling at a premium. And that comes with its own set of circumstances. And so we're likely to run into some type of pushback based upon price. So one thing I might say to a prospect early on is, they might say, hey, look, we're not the cheapest game out there. We're certainly not a fit for everybody. We understand that. And I want to verbalize that to you. When folks partner with us, they're typically investing a premium. And out of curiosity, I'm wondering, are there any other partners that you work with that you invest a premium in? In other words, you know you could get their type of service or product cheaper somewhere, but you've made the decision consciously not to do so. How do you typically justify those type of investments? How do you typically justify those types of partnerships? And has anything I said scared you to this point? So I want to get that conversation on the table early, because I don't want it to crop up later after we both invested hours into, hey, is this a good fit? Should we be partnering with one another? So that's one way that I might diffuse the bomb before it blows up, and look that ugly price objection in the eye and get the conversation started quick.
When you were first exposed to Sandler and heard someone suggest to you to say something like that, did that roll off your tongue pretty smoothly?
No, it did not. When I was first exposed to Sandler, Lindsay, I was working for a a subsidiary of Xerox. So it was selling hardware and software, literally walk-in cold calling organizations. And every opportunity I was able to uncover was a competitive one. So there were other people there. Usually there's an incumbent. And, our tactics and our strategies were, hey, we can serve you better, cheaper. And so it was always around, we can give you, better services at a lower price. And the notion of, hey, why don't we actually leverage the fact that we might be a premium offering? Why don't we actually talk about price upfront was completely alien to me, and took some doing for me to actually implement and start using. So yeah, not an easy tactic, but I found that doing this on a consistent basis does a couple of different things. Number one, it strengthens my conviction in what I'm selling and why I'm here. And number two, it disarms the prospect, because they realize, oh, this is a salesperson that's actually being transparent and sharing what the real world looks like, as opposed to trying to shove me into a solution that I may or may not need before I really understand what a relationship with this individual or this company could look like. So yeah, it's very helpful, but I got to tell you, counterintuitive was not easy for me. I'll speak for myself to implement.
Yeah, counterintuitive is right. And just like anything, it's getting the reps in, trying it once, getting gutsy 5 seconds at a time. I say that all the time. But when you hear these things, sometimes it just sounds so different than what typical salespeople do. But that's what the goal is, right? If we sound like everybody else, you walk like a duck and you quack like a duck, just like everyone else, and then price is going to be the only differentiator. So before we move on past this, I'm just curious, when you said that to someone a little bit earlier on in talking about the premium model, have you ever had anyone be put off by it, or like what was the general response?
No, I've never had anybody take offense to it. Almost to a T, people are taken aback by it. As in, oh, I wasn't expecting that. But then it opens up a conversation. There was one recently where they pointed to Salesforce as their CRM. There are other CRMs that exist. Some of them are free, but they mentioned Salesforce. They invest the premium in that because it basically runs their business for them in so many words. And so they gave me essentially the playbook and the justification for why they made that investment, which then is tons of information that's good for me to understand. Well, then how could these scenarios be similar? If you decide to make the investment in Sandler, and it's going to be at a premium, what would satisfy the grounds for justification for that type of an investment? So very, very helpful. Never had anybody take offense to it.
Awesome. Love that. And I think this brings us to mindsets, or there's a lot of different sources of negotiation or negotiating leverage. And we're going to hit on a couple of them when we were talking about this beforehand. And 4 that stand out to me are the belief systems, the need, time, and relationships. So those are 4 sources of negotiation leverage. There are more, but rating yourself on those a little bit, or checking yourself on those, and like, hey, where am I falling short within each of those areas, and what do I need to do to remedy it? So if we can just walk through those quickly. When it comes to beliefs, so what type of beliefs do you need to have when negotiation, so you're able to say something like that? And if you're not there yet, what can you do?
Yeah, good point. So a lot of different belief systems out there, a lot of head trash out there, and I'll throw myself in that bucket too with having head trash around negotiation. First and foremost, our negotiation starts the moment the first conversation happens, and how we're establishing expectations. So if I have a belief system that negotiation starts the moment the conversation happens, I can position myself with strength by leveraging something like an upfront contract and diffusing the bomb before it blows up, like we mentioned earlier. Another belief system has got to be, I have complete conviction in my spine that what I'm selling is meaningful, it's impactful, and it's worth 10 times what I'm charging. If I don't believe that, then I'm going to crumble in a negotiation. Because I'll tell you what my prospect believes. They believe that they're going to get the best product at the best possible price. And they're unshakable in that conviction. So you've got a couple of wills, the will to either sell at what I want to charge or buy at the best possible price. They're clashing here. So that's an interesting dynamic. And if we go into the negotiation without that unshakable belief, we're going to be in trouble. So those are just a couple of belief pieces there. Another one that I might throw in as well, and if you've been in Sandler for any amount of time, then you've probably owned this one. And that's, I'm financially independent and I don't need this business. So if I believe in my core that I've got a strong pipeline, that I'm doing well, that this deal is not going to make or break me, then I can act with confidence and conviction. I can ask tough questions. I can qualify. I can talk about budget right after I understand what their pain looks like. If I don't have that type of conviction, it's going to be very tough for me to believe that we're worth it. We return 10x on investment, things like that.
Definitely. And beliefs don't change overnight. It's something we have to work on on a daily basis. And whether it's journaling, whether it's affirmations, they've got to be positive and personal to whatever negative beliefs that you may be. And we all have them, right? We know that we have, what is it? I think it's like 100,000 thoughts a day and 70% of them are negative. So it's a real thing, and it definitely impacts our success and how we talk to people, and thoughts become things for sure. Cool. All right. As far as need, talk to me about need a little bit, and that as a source of negotiating leverage and how you can fall short and what you can do about it.
Cool. So this is going to sound overly simplistic. I'm going to admit that up front. Who needs it more? Do you need the sale more, or does your prospect or customer need the solution more? That's it. That's all we're going to measure here. Who needs it more? So if I, as a salesperson, and boy, there's a lot of psychology that runs around a salesperson's mind as they enter into an opportunity, like, if I sell this, am I helping them? If I sell this, how's this going to help my goal for the year? If I sell this, what's my conversation with my manager going to look like? There's a lot going on there. Ultimately, it's this, Lindsay, if we don't have a big pipeline, if we don't have alternatives, if we need this sale in order for us to hit a benchmark over a time period, quarterly, monthly, yearly, whatever it might be, we're probably going to act with some desperation. We're probably going to act with some neediness. It's going to come out in our body language. It's going to come out in our tone. Our prospects are going to pick up on it. That's not a fun place to be. I've been there before. It's not fun. And we want to do everything we can think of to avoid that, going back to the belief systems and going back to the behavior of filling our pipeline. Now, understanding how badly or how much does our prospect need our solution? The only way that we can figure that out is how deep their pain runs. And when I talk about pain, and Sandler people will know this, I'm not talking about intellectually, they've got a problem, we've got a solution, so that's nice, it should work out, because that's all rational and intellectual. What we want to do is we want to understand, how do we get them emotionally involved in the conversation? What is the emotionally compelling reason that would compel them to change? And that can only happen through good questioning techniques and conversations around what their gap is, how long it's been going on, how it's impacting them, their business, things like that. So need is huge. And if we go in and we feel like we need the deal more than they need the solution, we're fighting with little ammunition there.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And the questioning and that deeper qualification and getting to that must fix personal impact, business impact, where you're really understanding what is impacting in their day-to-day and all those different buckets. Yeah, a whole other conversation that we could get into. Maybe that's a part two. Let's hit on time and then relationships. So time is a source of negotiation leverage, and are we falling short? How do we combat that? Time's probably the toughest one, huh?
Oh yeah, it is. And it's very closely related to need. They're not the same thing. So timing is, When does and it's nice to know this before I ever get to the point where I'm proposing anything, by when would they like to see the service? Or if you're selling a product, we work in the technology space, so a lot of times it's the service. By when would you like to see that service implemented and adopted and doing the thing that you hoped it would do? So by when do they need it? What's their timeline look like? As opposed to, what's our timeline in terms of when would we like to see the opportunity closed or the deal closed? And or how long will it take us? What's the lead time from the moment that they say yes to the moment that they can get the product or service and adopt and implement it? What does that look like? So we want to understand their timelines, and we want to take our timelines out of the equation. But again, if we need the deal, chances are we're going to want to close it sooner, which means we might skip some steps in the process, which means when it comes time to negotiate, we're going to be out leveraged. So it's important to understand, by when would they like to have the thing in their hand doing what it should be doing? And by when would we, if we could wave a magic wand, when would we like to have the deal closed? Important to know that before we go in.
Yeah, that's huge. And in the Sandler 7-step methodology, it's part of that is after the pain step, doing a good budget and decision step. So the decision step, the who, what, why, when, and why the when. I think that's kind of what you're talking about too. Is why the when, like why the sense of urgency? How do you build that sense of urgency? And having, again, those transparent conversations, which goes back to kind of the mindset and having a little bit of guts to switch those interactions between buyer and seller and just make them more transparent. Awesome. All right, let's hit on relationships and what we can do or not do in order to leverage that in our favor.
Cool. So relationships, we'll measure it by who's got the stronger relationships, which is an odd question to ask, but the point of contact that I have at my prospective organization, what's the relationship like with them? Do they believe, and do I believe, that they are a champion for what I'm selling? Or are they a conduit to relay information back to those folks who are the decision makers or the economic buyer? We got to define what my relationship status is like with the individual that's my point of contact. Also, have I gone wider and deeper within the organization to facilitate relationships with people tangential to the opportunity we're talking about, to understand their perspective and what their emotionally compelling reason to change would be and why they care? So if I put all my eggs in one basket, we've got a lot of clients that have 6, 8, 12-month sales cycles, sometimes even longer, and their point of contact gets promoted or they resign and they go somewhere else. If that happens, the question is, okay, well, where's our fallback? What are the other relationships that we've been able to build? And that can be really tough, especially if this individual that's our point of contact has been making decisions and having these conversations with us in a vacuum and not really encouraging other people to join the conversation. And most of the time that's our fault as a salesperson, because we haven't asked the question that's hard to ask, like, hey, who else cares about this? Who else is going to be impacted by it? You're obviously the quarterback here. You're calling the shots. Out of curiosity, is there anybody on your team that you think would care enough to want to join us? And what you said with grace and finesse earlier, that's one question that we can ask, again, diffusing the bomb before it blows up to get other people involved. So how are we building relationships? One more aside that I'll put in, maybe this is a topic for another conversation. If we're negotiating with a current customer, we got to be careful, because if we've got a great relationship with them and we're talking about expanding that relationship in some capacity, we might be hesitant to actually qualify to negotiate from a position of leverage and strength, because we don't want to ruin that relationship because we're so close to them. So that's something that we have to be wary of. Again, I've failed spectacularly in that type of scenario a few times. So I know what it feels like, and we've got to set that aside.
Yeah, the relationship piece, there's so many elements of it. Bonding and rapport is the first step of the Sandler methodology for a reason. It happens throughout the entire sales cycle. The asking questions, that 70-30 rule, really asking questions and listening from the get-go. And I feel like I say this all the time, and it sounds so simple, but really being transformational, not transactional, and how we can really promote that type of transformational relationship, which would be of that trusted advisor versus one of a vendor, which might be a little bit more transactional.
Love that.
Awesome. All right, one more place I want to go here before we tie a bow on this. I know preparation when it comes to negotiation is important. We always say 5 P's, right? P. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. The same goes with negotiation as well. So I know that there's like a little 3-step plan that you and I have talked about. So share that with us if you would, quickly, and then it'll be a wrap.
Yeah, I want to pull up my notes here because I've got a concession matrix that perhaps I'll share. I don't have it memorized, but that's why we have it, because it's part of our preparation. So ultimately, we're probably going to get into a place, if we're selling into enterprise organizations with sophisticated buying processes, where we're going to get passed to procurement or somebody who's the economic buyer, and they are separate from our champion. It could be a CISO, so a chief information security officer. It could be somebody at the executive level. So we have our conversations, we get a technical win, everything looks good. And then they say to us, okay, Rich, here's the deal. Now you're going to go to procurement. And so these people are completely separated from the end users or the leaders. We understand the leader's pain. We understand the end user's pain, but we have no relationship with procurement. And so that becomes a little bit difficult. And so our black belt negotiators, that's what they're doing. And the idea is we want to be prepared. We want to be prepared for those types of conversations. So here's the real quick down and dirty 3-step process that we'll take when we're being asked for concessions. And the first step is simply this: reassure them, because we did a good qualification step up front, understood their needs, that we're giving them the best possible price, because that's what we're doing. We're not going to play the game of, hey, look, we'll give you an incentive here, we'll give you an incentive here. It's, hey, this is what the investment looks like, this is how we do business. If we establish that up front, and then we re-tap that at the end of the conversation, oftentimes, I'd say about 60% of the time, they're not going to ask for concessions anymore. They'll say something like, well, Rich, I had to ask. At which point I'll say, good, you should be asking, and then we'll move on. So the second step in that process is that they're still like, yeah, sounds good, Rich, but we still need you to come down 6%. What I might do there is I might verbalize, I appreciate you asking for what's best for your business. I'm getting the sense, Lindsay, that you probably have another alternative in mind. There's somebody else out there that you might want to do business with. And the idea behind that is, let's give them a little space to then elaborate on why they keep asking for a concession. And they're either going to admit that they do have somebody else and there's competitive pricing out there, and then they'll share with us precisely what that is, or they're not. And then the negotiation stops. No, I really want to do business with you, Rich. Are you saying that you can't do 6%? That's what I'm telling you. And then it ends. Now, the third step is, and I'm just going to say this as a Sandler rule, never give a concession unless we're getting something of equal or greater value at the end. So, and I've got my concession matrix up here. If they're asking for a discount and we decide willingly that we're going to give them a discount or some type of incentive, we don't say discount, we might say incentive, then I'm going to ask them to either add more to the contract itself, so more product or service, or extend the length of the contract by 6 months to a year. So that's valuable to me. If it's valuable to them to get a discount, that's equal. So essentially, for a concession matrix, the easiest thing for us to do to prepare for negotiation is let's list on a ranking scale of 1 to 5, what is the most costly thing for me to give up, to concede, which might be price, down to 2, 3, 4, and 5. So let's think of the top 5 costliest things for us to give up in a negotiation. And then let's think, what are the top 5 things that I could ask my prospect for in order to have an equal exchange? So if I'm going to give up something, I want to get something. So perhaps they want more response time, and I could agree to that, but I'm also going to ask for an introduction. either internally into the organization or externally. So Lindsay, I know we're running short on time. I'm going to stop there.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great way to end. I mean, it sounds like 3 steps are, give nothing, and except maybe assurance. The second step is give nothing, but a little struggle or sweat, go a little not okay. And then if all else fails, give something, but get something of equal or greater value. So it's pretty simple at the end of the day, but of course, all the other things that we talked about building up to that. Beautiful. This has been jam-packed with a lot of great information when it comes to negotiation. I'm sure we could do a part 2 to this, like we keep saying. With that, thank you for being on here today with me. Wondering, are there any last comments, habits, hacks that you want to share before we bid adieu?
I'll just say this, the best way to go into any selling opportunity, any negotiation, is to have alternatives. And by alternatives, I mean to have a full pipeline. You've got opportunities out there. If this one doesn't land because it's just not a good fit, it's okay. You've got alternatives. So the best way for us to feel that full conviction and come in mechanized for success is for us to have a lot of different alternatives out there. And you've probably heard this a number of different ways, but we might say in Sandler, keep grinding, keep building that pipeline. You're doing it for yourself. You're doing it so you can sleep well at night. You're doing it so you can enjoy your family on vacations and holidays and not be distracted. And it helps us in every facet from a conviction and attitude standpoint.
Sweet. Well, with that, thanks for listening, and everybody keep climbing. We'll be here for another episode in a couple weeks. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Bye-bye.